Hey, this is Sabrina Monarch of monarchastrology.com, bringing you the astrology forecast for June 9 to June 15, 2021. It's quite a big week. We have an exact hit of the Saturn-Uranus square that is defining 2021, as well as a new moon solar eclipse in Gemini. So let's just get into it. But before then, do like this video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell so that you get notifications when new videos come out. And please leave a comment. Let me know what you think or what resonates with you. The 2021 zeitgeist defining transit of Saturn in Aquarius, square Uranus and Taurus exacts this week. I have a video just on that I'll leave in the notes. And this happens in the wake of a solar eclipse in Gemini. That is also a Mercury Sun cazimi. So Mercury Sun, Sun cazimis or cazimis are basically when the sun is exactly conjunct within 1 degree a planet. And there's a solar infusion to that planet and a sense of, Mercury cazimis, I feel like really bring potent messages, and I really pay attention to what comes through. This combination of events, the Saturn-Uranus square, the eclipse, the cazimi, it feels like a surprise level in a game where the rules have changed and we're catching our footing again in a new level or a new world. This astrology feels frustrating and startling, at least to the part of ourselves that is not interested in having to adapt to change, right? It's a little bit inconvenient. We're just trying to do our thing and there's some obstacles. Or a lot of instability. On the other hand, a friend and one of the participants in my alumni program, Meteorite, Rudy, offered a quote inspired by one of our class's recent conversations on Saturn and Uranus. So Rudy shared with us, some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. So some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors, and love adventure, risk, and uncertainty. Yet, in spite of the ubiquity of this phenomenon, there's no word for the exact opposite of fragile. Let us call it anti-fragile. Anti-fragility is beyond resilience or robustness. The resilient resists shocks and stays the same. The anti-fragile gets better. And this is from Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder by Taleb. And I'll link to Rudy's Twitter in the notes too. Rudy's always sharing really amazing ideas. So if I might offer then, my sense is that the game that is being played this week may be disruptive or jarring, but also quite a boon, especially from the higher self's perspective. I think it's possible that we are even responding in new ways to historic stressors, like finally we have the insight or awakening alongside the graining or irritated situation that we've encountered so many times before, and it's like, maybe it was low enough level in the past, or we weren't ripe yet with the insight, but now we're coming up against those walls and it's like more like an electric fence that is sparking off insights or illuminations as we hit that historic situation. And with the Gemini transits offering an influx of novelty, North Node in Gemini as well, see if you can lean in here. There's a game in comedy improv called New Choice, where at any point in the scene, the referee pauses the actors and yells out new choice. The person who last spoke has to offer something else. And the referee keeps yelling out new choice until the actor generates something the referee is a yes to. So I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking for good examples of new choice on YouTube, and I'm sharing one that you can click on below. In moments of pressure, like the Saturn-Uranus square and pressing up against the edges of our old paradigm, combined with the Gemini transits, it really is like a game of generating something new, to break through some of the grave inertia of the past and open up something potentially even whimsical. Like we could be having more fun here, or things could be easier, but we have to move past our own limitations and our own consciousness. So first, we often feel the edge of the cage or the box, which can frustrate us enough to be inventive. So here's our week after a few announcements. One is that you can join my mailing list, link below, to stay in the know, receive these forecasts and the link to the YouTube version every week. They're also in written version, and I include imagery as well that I don't include on YouTube because, you know, it's a lot to make a PowerPoint every week. But you can also find me on Instagram at Sabrina Monarch. And my novel, The Garden of Sleeping Hammers, is now out and available for purchase, hardcover or paperback. And I'm leaving the links below for you to get a copy of that as well. I'm also going to be creating some kind of event soon, like a reading online. And yeah, I'm really excited to, hear what people think about it. I've had, a select number of friends and, professors read it, but it is new to share with the world. So I am eager to hear what people think. And I'm also looking for opportunities to speak about it on podcasts. So please connect me if you, are a podcaster or know people in the literary world that I should be talking to about this book. I would love to have some press around it. Also, I have a Kickstarter coming up soon to fund the 7th year of Monarch Astrology. We just turned 7. And this is the 7th year of creating weekly content. And last year, for the first time, I created a Kickstarter to crowdfund a year ahead. And you all definitely came through for me, and I'm asking for your support again. And one of the rewards that I'm wanting to share about now, so Kickstarter, as you may know, you can support a project at any, variety of price tiers that come with different rewards for backers. And one of the things that I'm generating is a lecture series about creative writing called Image Hive. An Image Hive, the title comes from this idea that the writer is a collector of images, and that behind the craft of writing is also cultivating our vision or being seers. So we'll be talking about the craft as well as the energetics or the magic beneath the craft. And I really invite you to check out the course page where I describe the 6 talks that we'll have and see if this is something that you want to dive into. I'm super excited to, crystallize and put into form some of the ideas about writing that I've developed from a lifetime of a career as a writer, potentially prior lives, but certainly in this life, writing has been my breathing and my eating and my sleeping. So I'm really excited to talk about it. And as a writer, I've always really benefited from reading other writers' books or interviews about their creative process. I found that it would really, grant me all these liberties of ways that I too could be a creative. I love the way that writers think. And so I'm excited to share with you some of the ways that I think about the craft. So again, the link for that will be in the notes, and the Kickstarter is coming out soon, like within days. I also have a new episode of Magic of the Spheres. This one is with Mariah Karina, who is a process worker and evolutionary astrologer. And we talked about this concept in process work of high and low dreams and desire and Pluto. It was a super juicy, magical episode. So go check that out as well. And we'll get back into the transits this week. On June 10th, 2021, new moon eclipse in 19 degrees of Gemini, 3:53 a.m. Pacific. Now, see if you have anything around 19 degrees of Gemini or Sagittarius. These will be places in your chart that are actively, being initiated through this eclipse portal. This is our second of 2 eclipses this current eclipse season. The next full moon in Capricorn in 2 weeks will not be an eclipse. So we just had 2 this time. And eclipse season, the way that I look at it, is up to a month or 2 weeks, depending on how much range you want to give before the first eclipse, and then after the second or third eclipse of the series. So eclipse season is longer than a month. It can be I'm not going to do the math right now because I'd have to think about it, but it's a moment in time, right? And time kind of speeds up and slows down, or there's kind of extra drama. There's a sense of eclipse season that it really is a ceremony. That's how I feel about it every time going through it. It's a wormhole, it's a portal, and a lot of shadow work comes up. And you may hear people on the internet giving you the advice to not do magic or to not manifest during eclipses. And well, I'm not going to take a huge stance on that. I do heed it. I do listen to it. And I'm much more careful about, manifestation and magic during eclipse season times. What you can do, and what I advise during eclipse season, is to think about the unraveling process that's happening, because the lunar nodes are really about our ego structures, right? And our ego structures and our personality creates our personal reality. So when we peel some of those layers back, we have the opportunity to have a more authentic or soulful experience in life. Like the soul doesn't have to be hidden behind so much thick wall of personality to be who we are. So there's a deeper self that wants to come out. And that also looks like shadow work. And something that you can do during eclipse season, more than trying to get your way or assert your will, it's like leaning back, peeling back some of the layers, and prayer and meditation. I sat down in meditation in 2017 with the eclipse, and I was taking notes, like I was just kind of brainstorming, and my notes actually turned into a course page for what is now the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive. It was practically, completely formed, like secreted out during an eclipse. And I still teach that intensive, and we're on the 8th run of it right now. I moved to Portland because of a vision I had during an eclipse. So I definitely let myself be moved by eclipses, but something usually comes through that's beyond what I even expect. So in terms of, asserting your will or doing magic or something, thinking about leaning back instead and letting the deeper thing that's wanting to come through emerge during this time period. So one potential of this transit, the new moon itself, but also the eclipse season that we have been simmering inside of. One potential here has been to allow new information or new perspective, which is Gemini, to literally eclipse our old belief systems. The South Node is in Sagittarius, which can relate to a process of reviewing, renewing, and letting go, depending, of historic beliefs that our ego has formed attachments to. So in terms of letting things go, these are beliefs that we hardly have a concept of who we'd be without them. It might be refreshing, even exhilarating, to let those beliefs go and step into an entirely new world, perhaps into a place where we genuinely have questions, Gemini, instead of answers. So I see the South Node as material from the past. Karmic material gets kicked up into the air, and we can let those things in the air kind of settle and let them go, or we can, in a sense, grab onto them and renew them. So when things are coming up that are, say, patterns where you're like, oh, I don't want to go on this ride again, you may let that one settle. But if something comes up that's like deep inside of you and it feels maybe historic in a positive way, like you're touching into a deeper part of your essence or truth that you feel deeply connected to, it is okay to renew those things. It's not just about sweeping away and getting rid of everything from the past. There's discernment here. But definitely, an emphasis in some sense on new information incoming, Gemini, and eclipsing or pushing out some of the older, outdated beliefs that we're ready to cycle out. While the South Node has been in Sagittarius, the South Node in part representing energies leaving the planet. Like I said, it's also things getting kicked up and renewed. The personal South Node Some people learn that, you're supposed to move past your south node and go to your north node. And yes, embodying the north node is great. It's not about ditching the south node. That would be like, Mark Jones had a metaphor at Norwalk one year about being on a plane with a suitcase. And the suitcase is like your south node, and you're carrying it with you to the destination, the north node. There may be some useful stuff in that suitcase. You don't just have to chuck it, right? But with the south node in Sagittarius, one manifestation here in terms of the collective has been the way that international travel has been more blocked than normal due to the pandemic. Sagittarius, of course, relates to travel to distant lands, whereas Gemini relates to getting to know our local neighborhoods and local culture. So how many people went to the park? Way more than ever. As well here with Gemini, the capacity to travel metaphorically through a change of mind. Without as much free range to just go somewhere else physically, we have to come up with other ways to generate novelty and keep ourselves entertained. I mean, unless you are going somewhere else physically, and then you have new neighborhoods and new local places to explore too. And so in terms of generating novelty and keeping ourselves entertained, because Gemini hates boredom, that's where fun, random, silly, and flexible Gemini comes in. So we might not think of it necessarily as boredom, like it could literally manifest as boredom in a sense of like itchiness for some more adventure, some more fun. But sometimes we also just get bored of our same old shit. We're just like, I have been doing this a long time and I'm done. I'm bored with it. What else could I do? Like, what's the new choice here? With the sun, moon, and Mercury, and a Mercury cazimi at that, all in Gemini on the North Node in Gemini, this signifies that our environments are rich with offerings of novel information or messages, which we could likely best contact through conversation, interaction, and genuine curiosity. Unconsciously, Sagittarius can hold an assumption that it already knows, whereas Gemini is often asking questions. Consider that our unconscious assumptions really are unconscious because the assumptions we have that we know about are conscious. So what are the unconscious assumptions? So here, in this moment, an ordinary lighthearted conversation that challenges a previously unconscious assumption is going to have a huge impact, even if the conversation seems simple on the surface. And we never know when we're the messengers. Just by being our authentic selves and sharing what's on our mind, we may be rattling someone's world, So the key into these kinds of expansive but ordinary conversations is actually leaning into curiosity, as opposed to treating the world like cardboard, like it is flat and lifeless, But of course, events during eclipse season can take on a more dramatic quality for sure. We can be more easily triggered or activated because eclipse season is essentially a shadow work ceremony IRL, like it's just happening. So consider what influences in your life are essentially neutral or happenstance, or somewhat normal, conventional to your life, but strike a deep chord with you that feels challenging. This would be your invitation to deeper embodiment, to like really sit with the message of this dream sequence and this ceremony that you're living out. When bothered, ruffled, upset, or encountering a charge in your nervous system or a bodily sensation that is more than you like to hold, notice and track and allow it as best you can. Be curious about its subtle textures, where it lives inside of you, and what its stories are. From the perspective of personal power, we actually have a lot more access to our own power when we are self-aware of where sensations exist within us and what stories we create about them. So this can allow us to alchemize our triggers, as opposed to not holding it inside and trying to project it onto the external thing that is the inspiration for that internal feeling. Because in a lot of ways, we don't have the control or power to manipulate the external. I mean, we can try, but it's not that satisfying, and it's not actually personal power. Personal power is when we are in the awareness of our stories and of the sensations and of what's happening in our interior, and finding alchemy and peacemaking and catharsis or wisdom or any of those experiences in the self, and that shifting how we participate with life, as opposed to shadow boxing with the external world. And the external world actually does change, like for me, one of the examples I like to work with is just being an astrologer in the world, and how currently when I tell people I'm an astrologer, most people respond with fascination and interest, and there's like a connection there. But when I first started, saying I was an astrologer could create like people were like affronted, or like, can you make money doing that? Or I don't believe in astrology. Like people would get kind of ruffled. And I always saw it as an opportunity to just stand my ground and to like literally not be affected by other people's projections or responses. That's their own story about astrology. That's their own assumptions. And there was a certain alchemical magic in just not altering myself to those projections, such as, say, having a conversation and coming across as an intelligent, thoughtful person with someone who thinks that astrology is dumb or, not a serious inquiry. And then astrology comes up in the conversation and they're totally taken aback. Oh, this person who seems intelligent is an astrologer, and they have to think about that. And to just stand my ground and let them have their experience instead of altering myself or getting insecure based on their responses or any of that. And I would watch people who were maybe initially annoyed or weirded out by the choice I had made in my life, even years later, be super into astrology and tell me about it at a party or something like that. So when you hold your ground internally, and this isn't about, being in your bullshit and holding your ground about something, but being with your integrity, people respond, the environment responds. It's different than trying to manipulate the external world. So the same day as this eclipse, we have the Mercury cazimi. So Sun in 20 degrees of Gemini conjunct Mercury retrograde in 20 degrees of Gemini at 6:13 p.m. Pacific. Mercury cazimis, so Mercury conjunct the Sun, always speak to me of a moment in time to be very present and mindful about what the messenger God is delivering to us. What messages are particularly striking or stand out. Consider the activity of taking time to track your impressions and what you notice with increasing nuance and honesty. Tracking. Mercury is retrograde, so things like reviewing apply here. It's easy to overlook connections or the profundity of our experience if we don't take the time to reflect. And then when we do, the quality of our experience unfolds and opens up to us. The message for us at this time may be accessed through the portal of a second or third reflection. So for what it's worth, for me, one place of overwhelm I can definitely connect with is if I were to try to write down at the end of the day everything that happened and all of my impressions and just catalog literally everything, it would be a novel, because there's so much sensory and processing and so much that's happening that it didn't used to be that way for me. That was something that happened from, years of writing. And the more that you notice things, the more reality expands. So there's that dance there. But what does help me in terms of reflecting, and so I want to offer this, you could reflect on your whole day, and you can also reflect on opening up a particular feeling state at the end of the day. So one of the ones that I like to do, and you can, alter it for what you're wanting to bring into your life, because magic and enchantment matters so much to me. Sometimes at the end of the day, I like to think about how the day was magical, what was meaningful. And by reflecting on it, it kind of opens up like one of those tea balls or something that when you put hot water on it, it blooms into this like underwater flower where there's this sense that, oh, there really was some depth there, but we had to unpack it like a zip file or something. So you might do this through your gratitude meditation, or a sense of, what energy are you connecting with? What are you looking to map more in your mind and in your soul? How did that energy show up in your day? There was I'm like rereading Living with Joy by Sanaya Roman, and there was like a daily joy meditation. And I think the practice was talking about doing this at night, like setting the intention for joy in your life. And then, sleeping on it, essentially deciding that in the morning when you wake up and before you go to bed, reviewing how joy showed up more, and only doing it, one day, like the first day that I did it. It was kind of magical to see how, like, oh, I set this intention, the intention blossomed, and then I could reflect on it and notice that it blossomed. And I may have not seen it blossom without going back and reflecting, which is our Mercury retrograde here. For what it's worth too, I think that, the messenger can, especially, you're here listening to an astrology channel, getting readings, astrology readings, tarot readings, speaking with psychics. I think it's always a great time personally. And this week I was remembering that and being like, I should schedule something. And I got a really amazing reading from Shahir, who I'll also link below. And some advice they gave me was echoed in a conversation with a friend later that night. And this reminded me that readings can so often be a portal into greater synchronicity. Readings are a different kind of communication, and there's an engagement with the field, or the information that's coming through, and it's just really enlivening to see that information strike a chord or become synchronistic in the day or days following. June 11th, 2021, Mars will enter Leo at 6:34 a.m. Pacific. So Mars was in Cancer before, and Mars in Cancer can correlate with a lot of emotional heat. Like you're kind of itching out of your skin a little bit with Mars in Cancer, in the sense that there's so much, Mars brings emphasis, and Cancer is like the internal world. And so I think that, as I may have said before, in like prior forecast videos, a lot of Mars and Cancer people are exceptionally caring. Like even just like the way that they hold animals, or, they make great masseuses. Like there's a sense that they really feel with fervor, and feelings can be initiatory. Like it takes courage to feel, right? So I find that when Mars is in Cancer, I end up feeling things where I'm like, ooh, this is uncomfortable to hold. Like my nervous system is not happy with this sensation, but I can work with this. And this can be a teacher. This can initiate me. And I'm so grateful for astrology for providing that lens, because, I think it takes time and practice to notice that the emotions that are knocking very loudly at your door might be your friends, and not just something to try to run away from, which could be an impulse here with Mars and Cancer as well. So there was this internal wrestling and pressure in the field, and it, got extra kind of heated up with Mars and Cancer opposite Pluto and Capricorn. Maybe there was a release of pressure, especially around, being authentic or letting something out when we're normally repressing it, which is going to be more of the unconscious impulse of Capricorn or Pluto in Capricorn. So Mars entering Leo may relate to a transformation of this emotional heat and pressure that had been building, and it starts to kind of enter a new space. And this may be more toward creative or outward expression. Mars and Leo can emphasize or reveal to us the game, how game we are for the creative process. Creativity in whatever form we like to be generative, which could be about art making. It also can be about how you design your life, or, anything. It could be about how you create a family life, or any place where you are being creative. So we have to like really expand creative here, where it's like generative, right? Creating something or cultivating something that didn't exist in its fullness before you engaged it. And it can be creativity and like art. So creativity can have this inherently edgy or vulnerable quality to it. I think it's a portal into our nakedness, into our eros. It is a portal into our deeper aspirations or wishes. It is a place we might not think we are good enough, or that we could ever achieve the vision that we have set out to achieve. Like, that's such a big, grand thing. How I don't know if I measure up to it. It's a place we have potentially neglected or ignored in order to be more practical or adult. No time for fun, no time to make fun stuff or create. I have to survive. With Mars representing will, courage, and action, we might consider how we apply our Martian energies to the process of creativity and being willing to face our fears that come up in the creative process. And, on the other side of this, Mars and Leo can be quite brawny and pompous and kind of proud. And there's like a emphasized, Leo is a proud sign, and there can be a sense of strutting and like really like flaunting what you've got. And so that is a side of creativity that I think is sometimes either the kind of medicine to overcome insecurity, like going straight into that like puffed up place. Sometimes it's just for fun. Like, I think that it's a form of play, and it's a form of maybe it's something we also access as or after we've overcome certain insecurities, and we can just be sassy, So one of the mysteries of Leo, and by mystery I mean initiation or a deeper entrance into, is that of self-validation, feeling connected with our own worthiness intrinsically, and then participating from life from that place. Therefore, flaunting what we've got and what we know we've got. This is literally radiance. What actions can you take to cultivate your radiance? How would you engage this part of yourself? Deepening our relationship with an energy like self-love or confidence is also a form of creativity. And then the art is our life and how we engage that frequency. On June 12th, 2021, Venus in 12 degrees of Cancer will square Chiron in 12 degrees of Aries at 11:28 a.m. Pacific. Chiron in Aries can be a pain point around beginnings or the start or the first leap of a given hero's journey, though we might always not recognize the pain point as being that, in that full context. Like, we're just scared to do something or feel stuck or something like that. The more self-aware we become, which is an Aries key, the more reflective we are capable of being when it comes to our fears and developing necessary courage in relationship with those fears. A painful beginning to consider here is simply noticing when a trigger or situation is confronting you with your range, when you wish you weren't feeling something or that something distressing would just stop, when you close or contract. From a certain vantage point, this is us rejecting the journey and wanting to control it and being like, oh no, I don't want to start this hero's journey. I don't want to enter this initiation. Like, we could look at it from that expanded perspective. So I'll give an example for me of like a range that I work with. What I've noticed is that if I'm in my own company and not really considering a single like romantic interest, there's just a certain baseline of peace that I feel in operating as like an individual sovereign person. But then when I'm interested in someone and perhaps develop anxiousness about if they like me or when they'll text me back, like that kind of thread of consciousness starts to come up, I'll notice myself being bothered and then being bothered that I'm bothered. Like it's meta at that point. And I've begun to reflect on this phenomenon more as an opportunity to expand my nervous system, to hold the sensations that I'm feeling and not get as lost in the stories of those sensations. I'll compare it sometimes to just like not really having a problem being a person on the internet or posting things, though I know that's an anxiety trigger for other people. So it's like we all have our things. It used to be more of a trigger or an anxious thing for me, and I worked through it, or I expanded my nervous system to hold it. So in my past, as I've really been deconstructing anxiousness and whatnot, I'm just becoming more aware of how I was more likely to play games in dating to kind of manage my feelings of anxiety and try to make sure everything worked out, which takes me away from my authenticity and isn't actually conducive to connection. So lately I just hold and open up to the sensations beneath the stories and tend to my inner being there. Right? So it doesn't matter why I'm anxious or why I'm upset. Like, sure, it does on some level, but the actual feeling or the sensation, just being there with that and tending to that. And I used to think that the external situation could relieve my feelings, right? Like being loved fiercely enough, someone who shows me how committed and devoted they are so I don't have to feel insecure. But more and more, I see my confidence and security as my own responsibility and the place from which I can recognize resonant connection or be disinterested in connection that, doesn't even match up to the security that I hold within myself. Just Saturn return things, from the path. So where it applies to you, just think of where you'd like to feel supported and safe, but where you may default to feeling like you need the external conditions to be a certain way in order for you to relax or open or feel safe. So here's where we have Venus in Cancer. She desires to feel safe, to feel connected, to feel at home, to feel belonging. And with Venus in Cancer squaring Chiron and Aries, we may specifically feel moments here where Venus's desires are challenged, or where Chiron and Aries issues are soothed, worked with. If we make a point to accept these feelings, as opposed to simply building defenses around them, we expand our personal sense of home. So this is not about buffering ourselves from feeling, rather it is about being able to feel more than we used to allow ourselves to. We all have range and places that are beyond our current range. When we touch those out of range places, Cancer can get insecure and crusty and want to initiate the shell and the protection. And Aries can get puffed up, reactive, and defensive, right? And there's a different lover or protector archetype within that can be accessed. Someone who truly holds and creates security with their presence and attention. And I think that it is a really interesting kind of balance and embodiment practice to navigate the ways that we skillfully protect ourselves versus when we are just being defensive. There is a difference. And if it is coming from a place of, tune into the difference between when it's coming from love and self-respect and dignity, and when it's coming from fear and aversion. Just something to be aware of and to track. Venus in 13 degrees of Cancer will also sextile Uranus in 13 degrees of Taurus, but I didn't delineate that one for us this week. June 13th, 2021, Sun in 23 degrees of Gemini will square Neptune in 23 degrees of Pisces at 4:40 p.m. Pacific. Sun-Neptune contacts will soften the solar field, or personally our auric fields, and create more receptivity. The caveat is that this opens us to all influences and can relate to having weak boundaries. There is an importance along this path regarding being spiritually sensitive or empathic, especially, of strengthening the auric field. This can be done through learning about energy work, playing with imagine and visualization, and significantly through contacting mindful and joyful and grateful states of consciousness. If we have the sovereignty to choose an emotional frequency or state and know how to create it, we're not always just tossed about in the environment and being a reflection of the environment. So I want to deepen into this for a moment. So thinking about like if you were in an ocean of everything, Neptune, and you have a very thin kind of membrane between you and that everything, between you and the oneness, and there's no discernment here, or there's no, let's say that the boundary is thin and permeable, but there's also room to play with it and to play with what we're letting in, right? If there's no attention placed here and we're just sensitive and we're picking up everything and we don't even know it, we feel deeply overwhelmed, moody, easily offset, right? Like there's an avalanche of sensations coming our way and we don't even know who we are in the soup, right? Versus when you make a choice from your internal being that you are open to certain channels, and you develop a kind of deep inner joyfulness, for example, that is free. It's just joy for the sake of joy. And it's not a response to what's happening on the external. It's just your internal light. Then when things come your way that may be a little bit more destabilizing or offsetting, you have that strength of joy or that strength of your auric field to take that in. Like you can still respond to it, but it may not spiral you out of control or be such a deep avalanche. It's like you already are with yourself in the frequency. And so I think for people who identify as empaths or extremely sensitive, the victim state within that is to feel just completely overcome with all these different sensations and a sense that you feel everyone else's feelings and you have no agency in that. Whereas it's actually a very creative place to be, because if you are sensitive to other frequencies and you take it upon yourself to choose what you want to be open to and what you're available for, then you can kind of create your own magical life. And I think it's important to talk about the martyr archetype here, because one of the kind of resisting thoughts is, well, what if I, am closed off to other people's suffering or the world's pain? Like that's bad, right? Like I should be available to feel all the pain of the world. And then the question there is like, why is that all on your shoulders? It's one thing to be open, to have your heart be that open to life, that you are capable of feeling the world's pain or capable of feeling heartbreak. And what you do from that place of heartbreak can be immensely beautiful. But if you have the capacity to choose and create a field of joy and create your own field awareness or your own field of emotions, your own auric field, you also gain the access to channel something from the universe and create an energy on the planet. And if more people were doing that, imagine the implications of that. So continuing what I said here, being sensitive is beautiful, but it can get into places of martyrdom, leakiness, victimization, or powerlessness. Building the muscle to be the energy in the room, or to be the temperature, not the thermostat, as they say, is learning how to create as opposed to only responding. Creating opens up the opportunity to add an energy to the planet, to skillfully guide our own lives and experiences. Responding can also be a choice and an act of intimacy and connection, rather than a gut, involuntary reactive response or something that we're doing unintentionally. I think also to think about the relationship with Sun Neptune, it is like being open to divine inspiration. So there's this kind of just combination of your own essence, where you begin and end, and what's streaming through you. And I think being creatively discerning about what you are a channel for can be radical. And then June 14th, 2021, Uranus in 13 degrees of Taurus will square Saturn retrograde in 13 degrees of Aquarius at 3:02 p.m. Pacific. Again, I have a video just on this transit alone, and I'll leave the link in the notes. There's a lot of frustration building in the field of this transit due to the confrontational nature of the square aspect, the 90-degree angle, and the nature of the planets Saturn and Uranus involved here. Saturn represents the crystallized structures and patterns in our life, convention, the status quo, how things have historically been done, or how we have historically operated. Uranus, on the other hand, wants to break free from all of that, or is already free, and here to disrupt the status quo, like Prometheus giving fire to the mortals. And you can see how in this myth, the government of the gods did not like this choice and punishes Prometheus. And more than a directly cautionary tale, and I've thought about this quite a bit, I take this symbolically as the resistance that the status quo has to things like change or the redistribution of resources or knowledge. So we're grappling now, and I'll come back to that. We're grappling now with a tension between how things currently are and what our responsibilities are, with breaking outside of that box. And it's a free floating caginess. Just want to put that out there. Free floating caginess, free floating desire to break free, but it can be psychologically projected onto particular circumstances or arrangements. You know, I see it showing up in all these different areas in my own life and in other people around me. And even for me, it's like having creative projects and being interested in them, but then feeling limited by them, like, well, I want to be doing something else. And just seeing that of like, oh, wow, like that archetype is there of like, here's the parameters of a project I've created, but I'm already thinking about how I could be free doing something else, but I like what I'm doing, right? And so having to kind of play with that, or moving to Portland and having a hard time finding a place to live more long-term, and thinking maybe I should just up and move to New York, you know, like having that kind of thought and just being like, okay, like I'm in it. I'm in eclipse season too, you know, all of that. But this transit can be stressful for ourselves. It can be stressful for families, workplaces, relationships, marriages, because tensions regarding freedom or the desire to change things is coming up. The degree to which these impulses have previously been suppressed also influences the intensity or urgency at which they are arising now. Right? So, I mean, yesterday I was thinking like, why am I even here in Portland? Like, I should just go, you know, and then like I'm back to like, oh, I love it here, you know, and I feel, but that sense of in that moment, it's Portland that I have to escape from. Portland's the problem, like just the mind going there, right? So thinking about what are my current circumstances and how are they the block to me being free? And that's stressful to be in a situation with people where that free floating kind of psychological complex is in the air. There's a lot of friction in that, a lot of friction. While the way this transit may show up may not feel graceful, Uranus can be abrupt or jarring in general, and the square aspect is also related to crisis. Some of these tensions coming to a head may be necessary. There are likely dynamics that do need to change. A first impulse on how to address the situation may be more extreme than needed, as a reflection of built up and repressed pressure. Like, I should just move to New York. Fuck it, you know? With some adjusting and processing, a more conservative approach may emerge as well. All situations being unique, some things may actually need a radical shakeup, whereas other situations may only need a slight adjustment. So you might think of a kind of eruptive conversation that feels more dramatic and then the tension settles down, or an earthquake shaking up the city and the city goes back to normal. Like there's a sense of the energy that's coming in is jarring and really makes things seem more extreme. And then there's some, it takes it from the normal baseline way up, and then there's some kind of compromise of where it lands. And to come back to the Prometheus metaphor, I also think the way that Prometheus is punished is deeply symbolic of Saturnian resistances to change. These dramas can be enacted socially, like who was it that leaked a bunch of like top secret government documents and is, a fugitive now? Like maybe Edward Snowden. I think there was like another one. So that sense of here's this top secret information and let me spread it. It's like the people who feel they own that top secret information are not going to be happy with that. Like that's just a natural cause and effect or consequence of being in that Promethean place. But this also happens internally in our own psyches in ways that are a little bit more subtle. So one way, like an example, could be a psychedelic trip or going to a festival or having a vacation or just having a peak experience where you've had more fun or experienced more joy or aliveness than you're accustomed to feeling. And then you return to, quote, normal life. And it feels like a fallen state compared to that peak experience. And so sometimes we have a resistance even to certain peak experiences because it feels threatening. Or like, how do we even integrate that? And then once we do have the peak experience, there is that process of integrating it, which can be very Saturnian. Like there is an effort maybe perhaps to change our lives a little bit or a lot to reflect the aliveness that we've just encountered. And I think that that's also very Promethean. So there are increasing levels of freedom we have access to, freedoms we have access to right now, that are simply places we have to allow ourselves to open up to. Historic parts of our ego that are more rigid in their protective role can likely put up a fight when we go for greater liberation internally. Like, no, don't go there. You're not allowed there. This tension might be loud enough at the moment to actually see it and process it in the light of day. And then, here's our opportunity to directly experience the tension of the Saturn-Uranus square, which I'm sure we're already directly experiencing anyway. It's the water that we're swimming in right now. So thank you so much for watching this. Do leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. I love you all. Many blessings this eclipse season.